Shabbat Shalom and happy 4th of July. A convergence of two wonderful celebrations this weekend. Powerful, powerful time to be considering both. Jewish people have celebrated Shabbat and continued to commemorate the going out of Egypt and the creation of the world by engaging Shabbat. And we have for generations upon generations. And it didn't matter which lands we lived in, which countries or nations hosted us, or whether we had our own kingdom or state of Israel. We could be on the moon or on a space station, and we would still keep Shabbat and let it keep us, in the spirit of Echad Ha'am's message, more than the Jewish people has kept Shabbat. Shabbat has kept the Jewish people. So we see and sense that Jewish time and space is different even when we feel ourselves citizens and part of the communal project of the nations in which we live, as we do here in America, as so many do. I mean, there is that age-old question, are you American first? Are you Jewish first? But we indeed see ourselves as part of the communal spirit, and celebrating this day means taking time to deeply reflect on our connections to people of all races, colors, creeds, religions, and whether or not we are truly pursuing the great values that are written into the founding documents of this nation. When all men and women will be equal, when we will realize the pursuit of happiness and liberty and justice for all will truly come alive through the policies and the laws and the ways that individual people and communal organizations come to express those values, we will truly have the nation that the founders really dreamed of. And as we build upon those foundations, and as we reshape and form the kind of way forward that we need to in this country, we of course feel a part of it. And we're cognizant at the same time, as Shabbat was the Jewish aspect of what these couple of days hold, we're cognizant of the unique history of the Jewish people in the lands that we have called home. And I think it wise of us on a Shabbat and a July 4th convergence to take a little bit of a look at just how we relate to this sense of our citizenship, or this sense that we have been part of other cultures and civilizations over time. Gives me a chance to mention and invite you personally to the summer scholar in residence we'll have soon at Or Zarua, Dr. Ronnie Perelis, who is a professor in the Bernard Revel Graduate School of Jewish Studies and director of the Center for International Affairs at Yeshiva University. And he is a world-class expert scholar of the Spanish Jewish scene, meaning that there's more to it than just the Inquisition. He'll be here over the course of 3 Wednesday evenings over Zoom to give us a wonderful set of lectures, starting with the community and talking about the crisis that we felt with the 1391 anti-Jewish riots in Spain, and the Inquisition and the expulsion, and then of course the crypto-Jewish experience afterwards. And as I mentioned, it's a good time to reflect on this, because of course it wasn't always a crisis situation for the Jews in the Iberian Peninsula and in the, let's call it, the Kingdom of Spain. In fact, the Jewish community there was a diaspora Jewish community who engaged in the cultural milieu, who were part of the peoples who inhabited the Iberian Peninsula there, and who pursued all kinds of cultural endeavors as they lived somewhat separately as Jews, and as they were a part of everything happening in the land we call Spain. Just to bring you back to biblical times, The use of the word Sfarad, which is the Hebrew word we use today for Spain, is mentioned once by the prophet Ovadia, and it seems there was an expulsion and diaspora formed when the Assyrians themselves were conquering and empire building, and when the Babylonians were conquering and empire building in the ancient Near East. And what we surmise is that a Jewish community of sorts was created in the Iberian Peninsula, as some of the citizens from the ancient Near East were expelled even that far west. We know of Assyrian influence from the great exhibition that was launched a few years ago back at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, from Syria to Iberia, where there was evidence unearthed of artistic influences and designs. And it seems like local artisans encountered some Assyrians themselves who came to create a cultural, at least, encounter, if not conquering, of those coastal cities that were necessary for trade routes out there in the Iberian Peninsula in what today is Spain. So the Jews were there. We lived there. We had a diaspora experience, and for a long stretch, it seems as though the Jews of that area in Spain had it pretty good. And it was even a destination when, in 139, Jews were expelled from Rome for what was called their corrupting influences. And so when Jews had a choice about where to go, they could, of course, at that time go to the kingdom of Judea, which was already in Jewish hands again after the Maccabean revolts in the 160s BCE. But Jews could also head out to the diaspora community and experience of Spain at the time. Fast forward in through the 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th centuries, before the time that Dr. Prelis will be addressing in his lecture series, we had what we consider to be a golden age of Jewish Spain. And in fact, we call it that because there's not only Jewish religious outposts and activities, but we are, of course, part of the trading there and part of the world, the economic world there, and we are part of pursuing the philosophical inquiries that were being made because of books being translated into all kinds of languages that the Jewish people can now read philosophy and mathematics and medicine and wisdom and the like. And Jews are also going to, for the first time, use Hebrew, the sacred language, to create and craft poetry that reflects not only on religious interiority, but on love and on drinking good wine. We embrace the best of what Spain had to offer. And of course, over time, we would experience the animosity and hate, bigotry, and anti-Semitism of those who rose into power and labeled Jews as inferior and decided that it would be either conversion or expulsion. And oftentimes, the Jews would pay the highest price with their lives. These lessons about Spain stand, in my mind, as July 4th converges with Shabbat, to remind us that Jews stand on sacred soil in the nations where we have found ourselves living, in the nations who have hosted us, in the nations we've felt a part of during this age of emancipation, and yet we stand on sacred soil just enough apart and just enough on the boundaries of history to reflect a little bit about what we see as the concerns and the conundrums of the societies that we are part of. Solomon ibn Gabirol was one of the great poets. He dies in about the middle of the 11th century. He was one of the great poets who used Hebrew to share a little of the turmoil of his inner life and early signs that there was a seeming favoritism going on within the Spanish society that was evolving as civilization progressed. And he mentions in one of his poems his longing and his hope for a Messiah, which can be taken as a longing and a hope for a sense of redemption and living freely within a society that's becoming a little bit stricter about who has rights and who has second-class status. And he asks God, why B'nai Yishmael? Why these Yishmaelites are being favored? Couldn't God shine some light from Mount Hermon in Israel all the way over to the Jews in the diaspora lands? I don't think he's longing completely for a physical return to the land of Israel. I think that he is writing poetry thematically in the sacred language of Hebrew to hope for some sense of redemption within lands where he finds himself living, lands that he calls himself connected to as citizen, because of the great history that he and his family have created within a diasporic experience. That for us informs, I think, our experience here. We have access to our religious language that helps us imagine a world more redeemed. We have access to stories and sacred texts that help define some of the values that can be brought to bear in discussions about an America seeking to achieve its greatness. Every generation must build upon another's good work in order to add gems into the crown of the royal achievements of nations. I think that's what the hope was in the poem America, written by Catherine Lee Bates, and whose music was composed by church organist and choirmaster Samuel A. Ward at Grace Episcopal Church in Newark, New Jersey. Though the two never met. The music stirs the soul. The words and the hopes expressed therein are really religious in their tone and harken back to what, in my estimation, could be the meeting place of all citizens and the individual communities of soulful, religious, and values-based hope that can move our nation forward. The poem in the 1911 version, that's the one we sing, reads, as I'm sure you are familiar with, "O beautiful for spacious skies, for amber waves of grain, for purple mountain majesties above the fruited plain. America, America, God shed his grace on thee, and crown thy good with brotherhood, from sea to shining sea." What an attachment to the expansive possibility of all America does really represent. And what a turn towards God. To say, like the Kohenic priestly blessing really expresses, that we need you to turn your face towards us, that we need to feel your power and be empowered through the holy blessings we receive. Crown thy good with brotherhood. Know that citizens who feel agency and who have a vision of that goodness defined by what this nation truly represents, that they may see the shining sea, create the liberty and the justice through law and lived experience that we all hope for in these times especially. The second stanza of that poem America reads, God mend thine every flaw, confirm thy soul in self-control, thy liberty in law. I think this is where Shabbat and July 4th truly do converge. We know that the law does set you free, as Pirkei Avot teaches. It's not just that they were etched on the tablets, that the letters were a full definition. The laws are fully defining of charut, of freedom. The third stanza reads, May God thy gold refine, till all success be nobleness, and every gain divine. This will lead to God shedding his grace on thee, crowning thy good with brotherhood and sisterhood, from sea to shining sea. Shabbat Shalom and a happy 4th.